This is SBS News in Easy English. I'm Peggy Giacomellos. Fiji has told a security summit in Singapore that climate change is the biggest threat in the Pacific. Fiji has been affected by a series of tropical cyclones in recent years, causing devastating flooding that has displaced thousands of people from their homes and damaged the island's economy. Defence Minister Inia Seroriatu says the war in Ukraine and tensions between China and the United States is of lesser concern to Pacific Island nations.
In our blue Pacific continent, machine guns, fighter jets, grey ships, and green battalions are not our primary security concern. The single greatest threat to our very existence is climate change. It threatens our very hopes and dreams of prosperity.
A proposal for gun reform in the United States, supported by a group of senators, has been welcomed by gun control activists. The framework is backed by 10 Republicans, 9 Democrats and 1 independent, and includes measures such as tougher background checks for buyers under the age of 21 and cracking down on illegal gun purchases. Gun control activist Christian Hain from the Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence says it's a big breakthrough in the debate on gun safety in the country.
We have not seen the likes of a framework like what we see in this package for the last 30 years. It's significant not only because of how this can have a real impact in lives, but to me it feels like this is sort of testing ground that we can pass bipartisan gun laws and the sky won't fall. And for all of those reasons, I think that this agreement is really important.
The head of the World Trade Organization has urged its 164 member countries to take action to deal with the famine triggered by the war in Ukraine. There are warnings that tens of millions of people are at risk of famine in parts of the globe. WTO Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala says she hopes the body's highest level meeting in 4.5 years addresses the stronger impact on African countries from wheat and fertiliser shortages.
The WTO must also respond to the looming food crisis. Droughts, floods, heat waves and other extreme weather events had already combined with COVID-19 and pandemic-related supply chain bottlenecks to lead us to rising food prices around the world. The war in Ukraine has escalated this situation. Economies everywhere are facing inflationary pressures, with high food and energy prices hitting poor people the hardest.
Socceroos coach Graham Arnold is confident his team will be ready should their World Cup playoff with Peru have to be decided by a penalty shootout. Australia will discover within 24 hours whether they will qualify for a 5th straight World Cup or miss out on this year's tournament in a winner-takes-all clash against their South American opponents in Qatar on Monday. Arnold says the team is prepared.
Everything that I've been driving since we've been able to do this camp has just been around, making sure that we work hard and when we lose possession, we get back behind the ball and we make things difficult for the opposition. And I think, obviously, a South American team, we haven't played them in World Cup qualifiers since 2005. that will throw a different challenge at us, but I do believe that the boys will be ready for it.
And that's SBS News in Easy English. This is SBS News in Easy English. I'm Peggy Giacomellos. Federal Energy Minister Chris Bowen says authorities are closely monitoring the output of energy after warnings of potential power outages. Queensland avoided blackouts overnight because the operator used generators to put more power into the system. But the Australian Energy Market Operator is warning of potential outages for Australia's southeast and east coast into Tuesday due to a predicted supply shortfall. Mr. Bowen told the Seven Network action is being taken to minimise any impacts. New South Wales Treasurer Matt Keane is urging residents to conserve energy use after a power blackout affected a number of suburbs on Sydney's northern beaches. He says the outage is unrelated to the current supply shortage and is because of the energy infrastructure. Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles says his meeting with China's Defence Minister General Wei Fenghe is a positive step in improving relations, but there's still a lot more work to do. The one-hour meeting on Sunday happened during the Shangri-La Defence Summit in Singapore. It's the first high-level contact between officials in 2 years since China imposed high tariffs on Australian barley and wine exports. Former Prime Minister Scott Morrison's call for an independent review into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic has also created tension in the relationship. Doctors say the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed problems in a health system already struggling with other pressures. Royal Australian College of General Practitioners President Karen Price says she was proud to see so many GPs and medical leaders recognised in the Queen's Birthday Honours after a challenging few years. She says it's also time to recognise long-term changes are needed to face the challenges of the rising rates of chronic disease, an ageing population, and growing mental health needs. Brazilian police have denied reports that the bodies of a British journalist and an Indigenous expert have been discovered in the Amazon. Dom Phillips and Bruno Pereira went missing on June the 5th, days after Indigenous groups threatened Mr. Pereira for campaigning against illegal fishing in the area. Mr. Phillips' brother-in-law told the BBC that the Brazilian embassy in the UK had informed the family 2 bodies were found tied to a tree. But Brazilian police released a statement saying no such bodies had been found and further investigations were taking place. In football, Socceroos substitute goalkeeper Andrew Redmayne has been praised for his role in winning the penalty shootout during the World Cup qualifier match against Peru. The Socceroos won 5-4 on the penalties, with Redmayne stopping the last kick after neither side scored a goal during the game. Redmayne told Channel 10 the victory is a credit to the whole team. And that's SBS News in Easy English. This is SBS News in Easy English. I'm Peggy Giacomellos. The minimum wage will increase by 5.2% after a decision by the Fair Work Commission. The outcome is a result of its annual wage review for 2021 to 2022. The decision increases the national minimum wage from $20.33 to $21.38 an hour. It equates to a $40 per week increase. Fair Work Commission President Ian Ross says the ruling was reached after careful consideration.
There has also been a sharp rise in the cost of living since last year's review. At the time of last year's decision, the Consumer Price Index and the underlying measure of inflation both stood at 1.1%. The comparable figures now stand at 5.1% for the CPI and 3.7% for the trimmed mean, or the underlying inflation rate.
The World Health Organization has called an emergency meeting to determine if the growing monkeypox outbreak should be declared a public health emergency of international concern. This is the highest level of warning issued by the UN agency, which currently applies only to the COVID-19 pandemic and polio. WHO Director General Tedros Ghebreyesus says experts will meet next week to consider its spread beyond parts of Africa where it is endemic.
So far this year, more than 1,600 confirmed cases and almost 1,500 suspected cases of monkeypox have been reported to WHO from 39 countries. The global outbreak of monkeypox is clearly unusual and concerning. It's for that reason that I have decided to convene the emergency committee under the international health regulations next week.
Power retailers and producers have been put on notice to avoid engaging in any market manipulation during the current energy crisis. Federal Energy Minister Chris Bowen says the Australian Energy Regulator has issued a warning and is monitoring for compliance with the regulations. A cap has been placed on the wholesale price of electricity in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia to restrict the rapid rise in the cost of power. Sarah McNamara from the Australian Energy Council says the industry is working closely with authorities to ensure there is enough supply, but says customers should be prepared to face higher prices.
This is an unprecedented set of circumstances. Some of the issues at play will resolve themselves in the coming weeks, but we are still going to see upward pressure on prices for the foreseeable future. And the important thing to understand is that there are no silver bullet solutions to the situation we find ourselves in at the moment, but the market operator is confident that we do have enough supply available in the market.
Cuba says it has sentenced 381 people for participating in protests last year in July. The charges include sedition, sabotage, robbery with force and public disorder. The protests were largest in the communist-run country since Fidel Castro's 1959 revolution. Some have received jail terms for up to 25 years. Human rights groups are calling for the release of those sentenced. Russian forces have tightened their grip on the eastern Ukrainian city of Severodonetsk, cutting off the last routes for evacuating citizens. Regional Governor Sergei Gadai says all bridges out of the city had been destroyed amid heavy bombardment. He says some 70% of the city is under Russian control, but that the remaining Ukrainian defenders are not completely blockaded. In football, the 32-team field is set for this year's World Cup. Costa Rica has taken the final place in the tournament, defeating New Zealand. Meanwhile, many of the Socceroos side that beat Peru to secure Australia's spot in the tournament will arrive home in Sydney this afternoon. And that's SBS News in Easy English. This is SBS News in Easy English. I'm Peggy Giacomellos. Federal Energy Minister Chris Bowen is confident Australians can continue to avoid blackouts, despite a warning still in place for New South Wales tonight. People in New South Wales are being asked to turn off what they can between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. to take pressure off the electricity grid. The Australian Energy Market Operator has suspended the electricity spot price market in most states until further notice for the first time. The move allows the operator to take control of directing supplies from energy generators to the East Coast power grid. Mr. Bowen says every effort will be made to avoid blackouts.
So far, we have successfully avoided any blackouts and any load shedding. The New South Wales grid will be under significant pressure between 6 p.m. and 8 p.m. tonight. Everybody is working all day to try and avoid load shedding this evening. I'm very confident we can avoid blackouts. We'll be working very hard to avoid load shedding. AEMO and the New South Wales Minister, Mr. Keane, have asked people nothing essential should be turned off, nothing that's necessary for heating, but if you have a choice about when to run some certain items, don't run them at 6 to 8.
New South Wales and Victoria will introduce an extra year of play-based learning before children start school. The states say the change will be introduced over the next 10 years. In a joint statement, New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet and his Victorian counterpart Daniel Andrews claim it will be the greatest transformation of early education in a generation. They also say it will be good for parents' careers and particularly useful for women. Mr. Perrottet says the earlier children start in the education system, the better.
We know that early childhood education works. For many years, preschools right across our state have provided our children great opportunities to set them up for school success. And during that period of time, what we've learned is that starting at preschool makes a real difference to children's educational outcomes and social outcomes.
The national unemployment rate has remained steady at 3.9%. Economists had expected the rate to be between 3.8 and 4%. A fall would have seen the rate at its lowest point since 1974. The participation rate has increased. The youth unemployment rate has also remained steady at 8.8%. Victoria's crime rate has fallen to its lowest level since 2015. Data from the state's Crime Statistics Agency shows that in the 12 months to March, the number of offences was down by 11.5%. Property and deception offences fell 6%, with 600 fewer home burglaries and robberies at their lowest level in a decade. The Australian Formula One Grand Prix will stay in Melbourne until at least 2035. The Victorian government has secured a 10-year extension to their deal to host the event. The event has been held in Melbourne since 1996. Victoria's Minister for Sport, Martin Pakula, says the government is sure it's giving taxpayers a good value for money. The event is usually held in March and is one of the first events of the Formula One race calendar each year. And that's SBS News in Easy English. I'm Peggy Giacomellos.
This is SBS News in Easy English. I'm Hannah Kwan. Anthony Albanese has held his first National Cabinet meeting as Prime Minister. The National Cabinet agreed to meet 4 times a year and is supporting a move towards a referendum on an Indigenous voice to Parliament. Mr. Albanese said the government will extend its COVID funding arrangement.
What that's about isn't necessarily additional dollars. What it's about is a recognition that our hospital system at the moment has people who should be in being looked after by their local GP, but GPs just aren't available. That the lack of nurses and health professionals in the aged care system means that many people who should be either being looked after at home or looked after as aged care residents end up in the hospital system as well.
South Australia's Premier, Peter Malinauskas, says he won't be bullied by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Russia's foreign ministry is sanctioning an additional 121 Australian citizens, including journalists and defence officials. Mr. Malinauskas says South Australia stands with Ukraine.
The people of South Australia stand firmly with Ukraine, as does every state and territory, and I'm just grateful for the fact that Vladimir Putin took notice. My heritage, Malinauskas, is a Lithuanian last name, and my family knows all too well the human tragedy that can occur in the face of unacceptable Russian aggression, and I'm very proud of the fact that my government's played a leadership role, and I look forward to doing that in the future.
New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet says his Energy Minister, Matt Keane, has been granted precautionary powers to ensure energy supply in the state and prevent blackouts. The new powers will reportedly give the government the ability to force coal companies to supply power generators with fuel. Mr. Perrottet played down the move, saying it was only taken as a precautionary approach and had been done before in the past. The United States is introducing a bill to increase support for Taiwan, including provisions for billions of dollars in US security assistance. The Taiwan Policy Act of 2022 threatens severe sanctions against China for any aggression against Taiwan. It also includes foreign military financing. In sport, Western Bulldogs player Bailey Smith has received a 2-match ban from the AFL for illicit drug use. Mr. Smith is already banned for 2 games for a headbutting incident, so will miss the Brisbane and Sydney games, as well as Greater Western Sydney and Hawthorn. The Bulldog star has taken responsibility for the scenes captured in viral videos, blaming poor mental health at the time. The Western Bulldogs coach, Luke Beveridge, is supporting Mr. Smith and questioned the AFL's illicit drug policy. And that's SBS News in Easy English.